"Bill, it's been a long time since you last saw me," said Danny. "Jean kept me up to date. I happened to run into Benita, and I couldn't let her ride alone when she told me she was in trouble. We headed for the Pelanchilos. Jean's horse, Princess, was with Benita, and they had plans to meet up on the trail. We made it to the mountains without any issues, but we were close to starving for a couple of days until Jean found us. Unfortunately, Jean was in trouble himself and couldn't bring much with him. We made our way to the crags and built a cabin," Benita explained. "That day Jean sent his horse to you. I had never seen him so broken-hearted." After Jean left for the border, Benita and I struggled to survive. However, we managed, and I believe it was during this time that she began to develop feelings for me. I hunted cougars and collected bounties for their skins in Rodeo, using the money to purchase the necessary supplies and food. One day I unexpectedly ran into Jean in El Cajon. He had returned from the revolution and was causing trouble, but I managed to get away from him after trying to convince him to leave town. A long time had passed before Jean finally made his way back to the crags and found us. He had stopped drinking and had changed for the better. It was then that he began to pester me relentlessly to marry Benita. I was happy with the way things were, and I was afraid of ruining it all. Benita had been a bit of a flirt, and I was worried that she might not want to be tied down. Jean would occasionally come up to the mountains with supplies and would always push me to make the right decision for Benita. He was so stubborn that I eventually gave in and asked Benita to marry me. At first she refused, saying that she wasn't good enough for me. However, I continued to be kind and decent to her, and eventually she came around to the idea. I was eager to marry Benita, and it was my desire that made her grow soft, sweet, and pretty like a mountain quail. Jean brought Padre Marcos, and he married us. Danny paused in his narrative, breathing hard, as if the memory had stirred strong and thrilling feelings within him. Stillwell's smile was rapturous, and Vienna leaned toward Danny with her eyes shining. "Miss Florentino and you, Bill Stillwell, now listen, for this is strange, I've got to tell you. The afternoon Benita and I were married, when Jean and the Padre had gone, I was happy one minute and low-hearted the next. I was miserable because I had a bad name. I couldn't even buy a decent dress for my pretty wife. Benita heard me, and she was mysterious. She told me the story of the lost mine of the Padres, and she kissed me and made me joyful in the strangest way. I knew marriage went to women's heads, and I thought even Benita had a spell. Well, she left me for a bit, and when she came back she wore some pretty yellow flowers in her hair. Her eyes were big, black, and beautiful. She said some strange things about spirits rolling rocks down the canyon. Then she said she wanted to show me where she always sat and waited and watched for me when I was away. She led me around under the crags to a long slope. It was pretty there, clear and open, with a long sweep and the desert yawning deep and red. There were yellow flowers on that slope, the same kind she had in her hair, the same kind that Apache girl wore hundreds of years ago when she led the Padre to the gold mine. As I pondered the situation, I looked into Benita's eyes and heard the sound of rocks tumbling down the cliff. It was a strange noise that grew fainter over time. At first I thought I was losing my mind, but then I realized that it was just the weathering of the cliffs. As I looked closer, I saw a gold pocket under the crags. I became obsessed with finding the gold and worked tirelessly like a team of burros. Benita helped me by watching the trails and bringing me water. Unfortunately, during one of her watchful moments, she was captured by Pat Haw and his guerrillas. Pat Haw was determined to harm Jean, and he ended up getting mixed up with Don Carlos. Benita had some shocking news about that group, but for now my focus was on the gold. Danny Maines stood up and expressed his gratitude to Bill Stillwell for always being a friend and having faith in him. He wanted to repay that debt by offering Bill and Jean Norris a partnership in his gold mine. He was even willing to buy any ranch, railroad, or town that they desired. Bill was to go out and fetch Jean so that they could draw up the partnership agreement with Danny's wife and Miss Florentino as witnesses. In conclusion, Danny Maines was determined to repay his debts and share his newfound wealth with his friends. He wanted to create a partnership that would benefit everyone involved and was willing to go to great lengths to make it happen. "I gotta show him this gold and make Danny Maines pay for what he did," Vienna thought to herself. The only thing that soured her mood was the fact that she could never pay back Monty Price. She wanted to tell Danny Maines and Stillwell that the cowboy they were searching for had left the ranch. but she couldn't bring herself to do it. The loyalty she felt towards them made her keep quiet. She watched as Stillwell and the cowboy left arm in arm to find Norris, imagining the disappointment and grief that would follow when they discovered he had left for the border. As she pondered this, she saw a familiar yet strange figure making his way towards her. It was Padre Marcos, and Vienna was taken aback. He had always avoided her, even though she had done so much for his church and people. She couldn't help but feel a little uneasy at his presence. He bowed low and asked for an audience, which Vienna granted. He then asked to close the doors, explaining that he had a matter of great importance to discuss. Vienna was intrigued as to what the padre could want from her. He then revealed a secret that he had been keeping, asking for her forgiveness. Vienna sat frozen as the words of the priest echoed in her ears. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. She was Norris's wife? The thought was too much to bear. She had no recollection of the night in question, but the priest's words left no room for doubt. Vienna's mind raced as she tried to process what had been revealed to her. How could Norris have done this to her? And how could she have been so naive? The priest's words were like a dagger to her heart, but she couldn't deny the truth that had been spoken. As she rose from her seat, Vienna begged the priest to stop. She couldn't bear to hear any more, but the priest continued. He spoke of Norris's drunkenness and his threats. He spoke of the sin that had been committed and the weight of the secret that he had carried for so long. Vienna listened in horror as the priest recounted the events of that fateful night. She felt violated and betrayed, but she couldn't bring herself to hate Norris. She knew that he was a good man, but he had made a terrible mistake. As the priest finished his tale, Vienna was left reeling. She didn't know what to do or where to turn. She was alone in a world that had suddenly become dark and sinister. She couldn't help but think that her life would never be the same again. As she looked up, she saw Norris and Padre Marcos approaching the ranch. The sight of them filled her with dread. She didn't know how to face them or what to say. All she knew was that her life had been forever changed by the revelation of the priest. The changes that your kindness brought to my people were no less than the transformation in Senor Norris. I was afraid that one day you would leave, return to your home in the East, unaware of the truth. Then came the day when I confessed to Norris and said that I must tell you. Senor, the man was overjoyed. I have never seen such elation. He no longer threatened to kill me. That strong and cruel vaquero begged me not to reveal the secret, to keep it hidden. He professed his love for you, a love that was like a desert storm. He swore by everything that was once sacred to him, by my cross and my church, that he would be a good man, that he would be worthy to have you secretly as his wife for the little time that life allowed him to worship at your feet. You would never have to know. So I kept silent, half pitying him, half fearing him, and praying for some divine intervention. Senora, Norris lived in a foolish dream world. I saw him often. When he took me up into the mountains to marry that wayward Benita and her lover, I began to respect a man whose ideas about nature, life, and God were different from mine. But he worships God in all material things. He is a part of the wind, sun, desert, and mountain that shaped him. I have never heard more beautiful words than those he used to convince Benita to accept Senor Maines, to forget her former lovers and be happy from now on. He is their friend. I wish I could explain to you what that means. It sounds so simple, but it is really simple. All great things are like that. For Senor Norris, being loyal to his friend and honoring the woman who had loved and given to him came naturally. He had brought about their marriage and was always there to help them in times of need and loneliness. However, he never spoke of them. If they were ever in danger, he would give his life to protect them. To me, Senor Norris possesses the same stability, strength, and elements as the wild and rugged desert that surrounds us. Vienna was enchanted by the soft-spoken, eloquent priest. His defense and praise of Norris, even if it had been expressed in the crude language of cowboys, would have been a source of pride for her. Senora, please don't misunderstand my mission. Apart from my confession to you, I have a duty to tell you about the man who is your husband. But as a priest, I can read his soul. God's ways are mysterious, and I am only a humble instrument. You are a noble woman, and Senor Norris is a man of desert iron, forged anew in the crucible of love. Quien sabe? Senor Norris swore he would kill me if I betrayed him, but I'm not afraid of him any more. He bears a great and pure love for you, and it has transformed him. I no longer fear his threat, but I do fear his anger if he ever finds out that I spoke about his love and his foolish paradise. I've seen his dark face turning toward the sunset over the desert. I've seen him lifting it to the light of the stars. Think, my gracious and noble lady, think about what his paradise is like. To love someone beyond the physical realm, to know that they are your partner and yours alone, never to belong to another unless through sacrifice, to watch them with immense pride and joy, to protect them from harm and to find happiness in serving them, to wait for the moment when you must leave them free and risk your own life to do so. Senora, these sentiments are beautiful, powerful, and terrifying. They have brought me to you today to confess my feelings. The ways of God are mysterious, and I cannot help but wonder about your influence on Senor Norris. He was once a brutish animal, but now he is a man unlike any other I have seen. As a priest and a lover of humanity, I implore you to consider that love may be at work here before you send Norris to his death. I have heard that you are a great lady in the eastern cities, but to me you are simply a woman, and Norris is just a man. Please do not dismiss his love without first being certain that you do not want it. You may be throwing away something precious and noble that you have created yourself. Chapter 24. As if struck by lightning, Vienna Florentino dashed to her room feeling like a wild creature. The dream she had created of real life was shattered, and she was left dazed. The incredible tale told by Danny Maines, the regret she felt for being unjust to Norris, and the shocking secret revealed by Padre Marcos were all forgotten in the sudden realization of her own love. Vienna ran away as if someone was chasing her. With trembling fingers, she locked the doors and drew the blinds of the windows that opened onto the porch. She pushed the chairs aside so that she could pace the length of her room. Now alone, she walked with soft, hurried, uneven steps. Here she could be herself. She needed no mask. The long habit of serenely hiding the truth from the world and from herself could be broken. The seclusion of her darkened chamber made possible that betrayal of herself to which she was impelled. She paused in her swift pacing to and fro. She liberated the thought that knocked at the gates of her mind. With quivering lips she whispered it. Then she spoke aloud. "I will say it here. I love him. I love him." She repeated the astounding truth, but she doubted her identity. "Am I still Vienna Florentino? What has happened? Who am I?" She stood where the light from one unclosed window fell upon her image in the mirror. "Who is this woman?" She expected to see a familiar, dignified person, a quiet, unruffled figure, a tranquil face with dark, proud eyes and calm, proud lips. But no, she did not see Vienna Florentino. She did not see anyone she knew. Were her eyes, like her heart, playing her false? The figure before her was instinct with pulsating life. The hands she saw, clasped together, pressed deep into a swelling bosom that heaved with each panting breath. The face she saw was white, rapt, strangely glowing, with parted quivering lips and great staring tragic eyes. This could not be Vienna Florentino's face, yet as she looked, she knew no fancy could really deceive her, that she was only Vienna Florentino come at last to the end of brooding dreams. She swiftly realized the change in her, divined its cause and meaning, accepted it as inevitable, and straightway fell back again into the mood of bewildering amaze. Calmness was unattainable. The surprise absorbed her. She couldn't trace back the countless imperceptible steps that led to her current state. Her former ability to reflect, analyze, and even think had vanished in a pulse-stirring sense of a new emotion. She only felt the instinctive outward action that was a physical relief, and the involuntary inner struggle that was maddening yet unutterably sweet. They seemed to be just one bewildering effect of surprise. In a nature like hers, where strength of feeling had long been suppressed as a matter of training, the sudden consciousness of passionate love required time for its awakening, time for its sway. Eventually that last enlightening moment arrived, and Vienna Florentino faced not only the love in her heart but also the thought of the man she loved. Suddenly, as she raged, something in her dauntless new personality took arms against the indictment of Gene Norris. Her mind whirled about him and his life. She saw him drunk, brutal, and abandoned. Then, out of the picture she had of him, a different man emerged, weak, sick, changed by shock, growing strong, strangely, spiritually altered, silent, lonely like an eagle, secretive, tireless, faithful, soft as a woman, hard as iron to endure, and at last noble. She softened. In a flash, her complex mood changed to one wherein she thought of the truth, beauty, and wonder of Norris's uplifting. Humbly, she trusted that she had helped him climb. That influence had been the best she had ever exerted. It had worked magic in her own character. By it, she had reached a higher, nobler plane of trust in man. She had received infinitely more than she had given. Her swiftly flying memory seemed to assort a vast mine of treasures from the past. She saw vivid words from the letter Norris had written to her brother. But oh, she knew. And while it may not have mattered before, it mattered now. She remembered the feeling of her hair blowing across his lips as he carried her down from the mountains. She remembered the way Norris had looked at her with pride in his eyes when she dressed in a white gown with red roses to greet her Eastern guests. These memories were fleeting, however, and her mind was restless. She couldn't find any peace. She was desperate and cast off her self-control, turning from her old self to face the truth. She listened to the ringing voice of circumstance and fate, and the whole story was revealed. It was a simple story with complicated details, beautiful in parts, but prophetic of tragedy from beginning to end. Norris had great love for her, but she had been blind to it. Vienna was like a prisoner in a cell, pacing back and forth. "Oh, it's all terrible," she cried. "I am his wife. His wife, that meeting, the marriage, his fall, his rise, his silence, his pride, and I can never be anything to him. Could I be anything to him, Vienna Florentino? But I am his wife, and I love him. His wife, I am the wife of a cowboy. That might be undone. Can my love be undone? Ah, do I want anything undone? He is gone, gone. Could he have meant, I will not, dare not think of that. He will come back. No, he never will come back." Vienna Florentino was consumed with worry. The days that followed the emotional storm were excruciatingly long and seemingly hopeless. She spent countless hours lying awake, lost in passionate thoughts. Her mind was plagued with a growing fear that Norris had crossed the border to invite a bullet that would free her from her misery. Eventually, her fear became a reality. The news came to her in a sudden, unmistakable flash of certainty. She was devastated. The fire of her pain burned deep within her, and it was evident in her eyes. She withdrew into herself, waiting for confirmation of her worst fears. At times, she would lash out in anger at the circumstances that were beyond her control, at herself, and at Norris. "He should have learned from Ambrose," she cried out in frustration, bitter with a pain that she knew was not consistent with her pride. She remembered Christine's straightforward account of Ambrose's courtship. "He told me he loved me, he kissed me, he hugged me, he put me on his horse, he rode away with me, he married me." But in the next moment, Vienna denied the insistent clamor of a love that was slowly breaking her spirit. She was constantly haunted by feelings of remorse, for she had failed to recognize a man's honesty, manliness, uprightness, faith, and devotion. She had been blind to love and nobility, which she had herself created. The wise words of Padre Marcos echoed in her mind, and she struggled to overcome her bitterness, to reject her intelligence, and to quell her pride. As she weakened, she gave in more and more to her yearning, hopeless hope. She had avoided the light of the stars and had forcefully dismissed every memory of Norris's kisses. But one night she deliberately went to her window, and there they were shining bright. Oh, my stars! They shone beautifully as always, but there was something different about them. They seemed closer, warmer, and spoke a kinder language. They were more helpful than ever before, teaching her that regret was pointless. In their grand, blazing task, they revealed to her the supreme duty of life, to be true. Those shining stars made her yield. She whispered to them that the West had claimed her, Norris had claimed her forever, whether he lived or died. She surrendered to her love, and it felt as though he was there with her, dark-faced, fire-eyed, violent in his actions, crushing her to his chest in that farewell moment, kissing her with one burning kiss of passion, then with cold, terrible lips of renunciation. "I am your wife," she whispered to him. In that moment, throbbing, exalted, quivering in her first sweet, tumultuous surrender to love, she would have given her all her life to be in his arms again, to meet his lips, to put forever out of his power any thought of wild sacrifice. The next morning, Vienna went out onto the porch, and Stillwell, haggard and stern, handed her a message from El Cajon. He spoke in a husky, incoherent voice. She read the message with a heavy heart. El Capitan Norris had been captured by rebel soldiers in a fight at Agua Prieta the day before. He was a sharpshooter in the federal ranks and had been sentenced to death on Thursday at sunset. Chapter 25. "Stillwell!" Vienna's cry was filled with agony, more than just a broken heart. It was the crumbling of a false sense of pride, old beliefs, and bloodless standards. She had finally conquered her doubts and found herself, her love, her salvation, and her duty to a man. Her unquenchable spirit blazed out of the darkness, and she refused to be cheated. The old cattleman, Stillwell, stood silently before her, staring at her pale face and fiery eyes. "Stillwell, I'm Norris's wife," Vienna exclaimed. "My God, Miss Princess," Stillwell exclaimed. "I knew something terrible was wrong. Oh, it's such a pity." "Do you think I'll let him be shot when I know him now, when I'm no longer blind, when I love him?" Vienna interrupted with passionate fervor. "I will save him. This is Wednesday morning. I have 36 hours to save his life. Stillwell, send for Link in the car." Vienna swiftly made her way into her office, her mind racing with clarity and speed. She devised a plan in a single moment of inspiration, which required the careful wording of telegrams to Washington, New York, and San Antonio. These messages were intended for senators, representatives, and people of high public and private status, people who would remember her and would work tirelessly to help her. Never before had Vienna's position meant anything to her in comparison to what it meant now. Never before had money seemed as powerful as it did in that moment. She dispelled heartbreaking thoughts and focused on the power she had at her disposal. She had wealth and influence, and she would use these resources to save Norris. Though she felt the suspense and strain almost beyond endurance, she would not entertain the possibility of failure. When Vienna emerged from her office, the car was waiting with Link, helmet in hand, a cool, bright gleam in his eyes, and Stillwell, losing his haggard misery, beginning to respond to Vienna's spirit. "Link, drive Stillwell to El Cajon in time for him to catch the El Paso train," she said. "Wait here for his return," she said, handing Stillwell the telegrams to send from El Cajon and drafts to cash in El Paso. "If any message comes from him, telephone it at once to me." She instructed him to go before the rebel junta, then stationed in Juarez to explain the situation, to inform them to expect communications from Washington officials requesting and advising Norris's exchange as a prisoner of war, and to offer to buy his release from the rebel authorities. After hearing her out, Stillwell's huge, bowed form straightened, and a ghost of his old smile just moved his lips. He was no longer young, and hope could not at once drive away stern and grim realities. As he bent over her hand, his manner appeared courtly and reverent, but either he was speechless or felt the moment was not one for him to break silence. He climbed to a seat beside Link, who pocketed the watch he had been studying, and leaned over the wheel. There was a crack, a muffled sound bursting into a roar, and the big car jerked forward to bound over the edge of the slope, to leap down the long incline, to shoot out upon the level valley floor and disappear in moving dust. For the first time in days, Vienna visited the gardens, the corrals, the lakes, and the quarters of the cowboys. Though imagining she was calm, she feared she looked strange to Nels, Nick, Frankie Slade, and the boys best known to her. The situation for them must have been one of tormenting pain and bewilderment. They acted as if they wanted to say something to her, but found themselves spellbound. She wondered if they knew she was Norris's wife. Stillwell had not had time to tell them. Besides, he would not have mentioned the fact. The cowboys gathered on the porch were aware of Norris's impending execution. They knew that if Vienna hadn't been angry with him, he wouldn't have crossed the border in a desperate mood. Vienna engaged them in small talk about the weather and the animals before abruptly changing her mind. "Nels, you and Nick don't need to go on duty today," she told them. "I may need you. She trailed off, her eyes catching sight of Norris's black horse prancing in a nearby corral. "I've sent Stillwell to El Paso," she continued, her voice shaking. "He'll save Norris. I have to tell you all something. I am Norris's wife." The cowboys were stunned into silence as Vienna left them and retreated to her room. As she tried to occupy herself with various tasks, Vienna found that she couldn't stop thinking about Norris and his fate. Why had he become a Federal? She remembered that he had fought for Madero, the rebel, and had earned the title of El Capitan. But now Madero was a Federal, and Norris remained loyal to him. Had Norris crossed the border with any other motive besides the one he had hinted at with his mocking smile and words? You might have saved me a hell of a lot of trouble. Vienna remembered the shock of touching the gun she had dropped in horror. Did he mean the trouble of getting himself shot in a way that wouldn't be cowardly? Or was there something else going on, like Don Carlos and his guerrillas? The uncertainty gnawed at Vienna as she waited for news of Norris's fate. Vienna couldn't shake the thought that Norris was out for blood. Don Carlos's blood. She imagined him as a vengeful, silent man driven by wild justice, much like Monty Price. It was the kind of deed that Nels or Nick Steele might do, or even Gene Norris. Vienna regretted that Norris, who had risen so high, had not risen above seeking to kill his enemy, no matter how evil that enemy might be. Vienna had never been interested in the local newspapers that arrived a day late from El Paso and Adam, but now she eagerly pored over any she could find, reading every word about the revolution. To her, every word was of vital significance. The newspapers reported that American citizens had been robbed by Mexican rebels in Madera, Chihuahua, to the tune of $25,000 worth of goods. The rebels, under the command of General Antonio Rojas and comprising 1,000 men, were headed westward through Sonora to Agnemas and Pacific Coast points. They planned to pass through Dolores, where they would be met by 1,000 Maderista volunteers. The railroad south of Madera was being destroyed, leaving many Americans marooned. General Rojas had executed 5 men for trivial offenses. Meanwhile, somewhere in Mexico, Patrick Dunn, an American citizen, was in prison under sentence of death. On July 31st, the news continued to pour in from Juarez, Mexico. Today, General Orozco, the leader of the rebels, announced that if the United States would remove all barriers and allow them to purchase as much ammunition as they needed, he could guarantee peace would be restored in Mexico and a stable government would take over within 60 days. The situation in Casas Grandes, Chihuahua has worsened as rebel soldiers looted the homes of many Mormon families living in the area. As a result, all Mormon families have fled to El Paso for safety. Despite General Salazar executing 2 of his soldiers for the robbery, he has made no effort to prevent his troops from looting the homes of unprotected Americans. Last night and today, many Americans from Pearson, Madera, and other areas outside the Mormon settlements have fled on trains. Refugees from Mexico have also continued to pour into El Paso, with about 100 arriving last night, mostly men. Vienna was reading about the war in Mexico with great interest. She knew it wasn't a traditional war, but a revolution that was causing starvation, looting, and burning. She was particularly disturbed by the news of 5 men being executed for minor offenses, as it made her fear for the safety of Norris, an American cowboy who was being held captive by the rebels. Vienna waited patiently for any news, but none came. As the sun began to set, she went outside and looked out at the desert, hoping for strength. The desert was red and mutable, shrouded in shadows, and it seemed to mirror her own terrible mood. The stars that had previously soothed her spirit failed her, and she felt completely alone in her torment. She knew Norris was out there somewhere, waiting for his fate to be decided, and the thought of the endless, insupportable hours he was enduring made her heart ache. Night fell, and the stars continued to be unresponsive to her pain. She retreated to the refuge of her room, seeking solace in the darkness as she lay there with her eyes wide open, waiting. Night had always held a certain mystic allure for her, but now her mind was consumed by a vague and monstrous gloom. Despite this, she remained acutely aware of her surroundings, her senses attuned to every sound. She heard the measured tread of a guard, the rustle of the wind stirring the window curtain, and the mournful wail of a coyote in the distance. The dead silence of the night eventually became oppressive, weighing down on her like lead. She waited in silence for so long that when the window casements finally showed a hint of gray, she believed it was just her imagination and that dawn would never come. She prayed that the sun would not rise, that it would not begin its short 12-hour journey towards what could be Norris's fatal setting. But the dawn came, swift and remorseless. Daylight had broken, and it was Thursday. Suddenly, the sharp ringing of the telephone bell broke the silence, startling her into action. She ran to answer the call. "Hello, Miss Princess," came the hurried voice on the other end. "This is Link speaking. I have messages for you. They're favorable, according to the operator. I'll ride out with them. I'll be there soon." And with that, the line went dead. Vienna desperately wanted to know more, but was grateful for what little information she had. Favorable. Stillwell had been successful. Her heart leaped with joy. Suddenly she felt weak, and her hands failed her as she struggled to get dressed. Breakfast held no meaning for her except that it helped her pass the dragging minutes. Finally she heard the low hum of a car, quickly mounting to a roar and ending with a sharp report. Link had arrived. If her feet had kept pace with her heart, she would have raced out to meet him. She saw him, helmet thrown back, watch in hand, and he looked up at her with his cool, bright smile, with his familiar apologetic manner. "Miss Princess, it took me 53 minutes to get here," Link said, "but I had to ride around a herd of steers and knock a couple off the trail." He handed her a bundle of telegrams. Vienna's hands were shaking as she tore them open and began to read them with quick, blurry eyes. Some were from Washington, assuring her of all possible assistance, while others were from New York. The Spanish messages from El Paso were harder to translate at a glance. She searched for Stillwell's message, which was the last one. It was a long message that read, "I bought Norris's release and arranged for his transfer as a prisoner of war. Both matters are official. He's safe if we can get notice to his captors. I'm not sure if they received my wire, so I'm afraid to trust it. You need to go with Link to Agua Prieta. Take the Spanish messages with you. They will protect you and secure Norris's freedom. Bring Nels with you and don't stop for anything. Tell Link that we trust him and let him drive the car. Stillwell." Vienna felt a surge of gratitude and joy as she read the first few lines of Stillwell's message. But as she continued to read, she felt a cold, numbing pain. When she got to the last line, she cast aside her doubts and fears and faced the situation with a determined resolve. "Read it," she said, handing the telegram to Link. He read it and looked up at her with a blank expression. "Link, do you know the roads, trails, and desert between here and Agua Prieta?" she asked. "That's my old stomping ground, and I know Sonora too," he replied. "We need to get to Agua Prieta before sunset, long before, so that if Norris is in a nearby camp, we can get to him in time," Vienna said urgently. "Miss Princess, that's impossible," Link exclaimed. "Stillwell's crazy to suggest it." "Can we drive an automobile from here into northern Mexico?" Vienna asked. "Sure, but it'll take time," Link replied. "We don't have much time," Vienna said, her eagerness growing. "If Norris ain't found, he's as good as dead," Vienna said urgently to Link Stevens. The cowboy's demeanor changed suddenly, losing his usual confidence and appearing aged. "I'm just a cowboy, Miss Princess," he stammered. "The ride down to the border is treacherous. I could wreck the car and turn your hair gray. You wouldn't be the same after that." Vienna revealed herself as Norris's wife, pleading with Link to help save him. Link's body jerked, mimicking Norris's own memorable reaction, and Vienna poured out her heart to him. "I love him. I've been unfair to him. I must save him. Link, please help me. I'll gladly risk anything to save him." Link's response was beautiful in its selflessness. He didn't seem to think of himself at all, and Vienna felt a kinship with him that she couldn't explain. "Miss Princess, that ride is impossible, but I'll do it," he replied, his eyes shining with a daring spirit. "I'll need about 30 minutes to go over the car and pack what I'll need," Link informed Vienna. She couldn't express her gratitude and only requested that he inform the off-duty cowboys, including Nels, to come up to the house. Once Link had left, Vienna took a moment to prepare for the ride. She placed her money and telegrams in a satchel and donned a long coat. She wrapped veils around her head and neck, forming a hood to cover her face if necessary. She even remembered to bring an extra pair of goggles for Nels. With her gloves on, she was prepared for the ride. Upon reaching her home, she explained the situation to the cowboys and left them in charge. She then asked Nels to accompany her down into the desert. Nels turned white as a sheet, reminding Vienna of his fear of Link's driving. "Nels, I'm sorry to ask you," she added. "I know you hate the car, but I may need you so much." Nels replied, "Why, Miss Princess, that's surely a mistaken idea of yours about me hating the car. I was only jealous of Link, and the boys made that joke up about me being scared of riding fast. I'm proud to go, and if you're going down among the greasers, you want me." Despite Nels's cool, easy speech and familiar swagger, Vienna could see the gray still in his face. Nels was inexplicably afraid of the massive white automobile, but he pretended otherwise. It was a strange manifestation of his loyalty. Vienna heard the vehicle's hum as Link approached, driving up the slope. He executed a brief sliding turn and parked in front of the porch. Link had secured 2 long, weighty planks on either side of the car, and he had attached extra tires wherever he could. There was a huge barrel in one of the back seats and a collection of tools and ropes in the other. Nels could only just fit in the remaining space. Link placed Vienna next to him in the front, and then he hunched over the wheel. Vienna waved at the silent cowboys on the porch. There were no audible goodbyes. The car left the yard, bounced from level to slope, and sped down the road out into the open valley. The stronger gusts of dry wind in Vienna's face indicated an increase in speed. She took a quick look at the smooth, unobstructed cattle road that disappeared into the distant gray. She glanced at the driver beside her, who was wearing leather garb and a leather helmet, before she pulled the veil's hood over her face and secured it tightly around her neck. The wind grew stronger and harder, pressing against her like a sheet of lead and forcing her back into her seat. The car's vibration was constant, intense, and incredibly rapid. Occasionally she felt a long swing, as if she were about to be propelled into the air, but the car's effortless speed was undisturbed. The buzz and roar of the wheels and the heavy body in motion increased to a continuous droning hum. The wind became unbearable, moving towards her like a solid object, crushing her chest and making breathing difficult. Vienna felt as though time was flying by at the speed of miles. Vienna felt a change in the car's movement and realized that Link was reducing speed. She took off her hood and goggles, grateful to be able to breathe freely and see clearly. The town of Chiricahua lay to her right, while the gray valley sloped to her left. The Guadalupe Mountains loomed in the distance, and Vienna couldn't help but think of Norris. Link turned the car south and picked up speed, and Vienna pulled her hood back over her face as the wind began to sting. It felt like she was riding at night as the car hurtled forward, wedging her back as if in a vise. The miles flew by, and Vienna felt the car accelerate to a certain swiftness before slowing again. She uncovered her face and saw another village passing by. She asked Link if it was Bernardino, and he confirmed that it was, 80 miles away. Vienna checked the time and saw that it was only 9:45. Link had made quick work of the valley miles, and Vienna couldn't help but feel thrilled by the ride. As they drove beyond Bernardino Link, he steered the car off the road and onto a long, sloping hill. Vienna noticed that the valley appeared to run south under the dark Guadalupe brows, and they were headed southwest. The grass began to disappear as they climbed the ridge, replaced by dusty white spots, patches of mesquite and cactus, and scattered areas of broken rock. Vienna had expected what she saw from the ridge top, but the reality of the desert below still shocked her. She had lived on a ranch surrounded by desert, but this was different. This was the Red Desert, stretching far into Mexico, Arizona, and California, all the way to the Pacific. A bare, hummocky ridge lay ahead, down which the car was gliding, bouncing, and swinging. This slant seemed to merge into a corrugated world of rock and sand, patched by flats and basins, streaked with canyons and ranges of saw-toothed stone. The distant Sierra Madres were clearer, bluer, and less smoky than she had ever seen them. Vienna's faith held strong in the face of this daunting obstacle. Gradually, the desert beneath them began to rise and condense its varying lights and shades, until it hid its depths and heights behind red ridges, little steps, outposts, and landmarks at its gates. As the car bounced along, Vienna noticed that Link was following an old wagon road. When they reached the foot of the long slope, they struck rougher ground, and Link began to zigzag cautiously. The wagon road would disappear and then reappear, but Link did not always follow it. He maneuvered through cuts, detours, and crosses, all the while venturing deeper into a labyrinth of low crimson dunes, flat canyon beds lined with banks of gravel, and ridges that rose higher and higher. Despite the challenging terrain, Link Stevens pressed on, never once turning back or heading into a dead end. Vienna recognized that it was Link's incredible judgment of the land that made their progress possible. He knew the lay of the land like the back of his hand, never hesitating after making a decision on which way to go. Eventually, they descended into a wide canyon where the wheels of the car struggled to gain traction in the dragging sand. The sun beat down mercilessly, kicking up clouds of dust with no breeze to alleviate the oppressive heat. The only sounds were the occasional slide of rocks down the weathered slopes and the labored chugging of the machine. The slow pace of their journey began to test Vienna's faith, prompting Link to take over the wheel and call for Nels. Together they untied the long planks and laid them out in front of the wheels, allowing them to pass over the otherwise impassable sand and gravel. As they worked their way through the canyon, Vienna marveled at Link's foresight in bringing the planks along. Eventually, the canyon opened up into a vast expanse, affording them an unobstructed view for miles. The desert stretched out before them in a series of steps, the mesas and escarpments bathed in the morning light. The landscape was a kaleidoscope of colors, ranging from gray, drab stone to vibrant shades of yellow, pink, and rust red. Ahead lay a wind-swept floor as hard as rock, and Link wasted no time in rushing the car over it, eager to make up for lost time. Vienna's ears were filled with a loud, persistent hum that sounded like a hungry bee. She soon realized it was the sound of gravel being kicked up by the car's wheels. The car was moving so fast that Vienna could only make out the colored landmarks ahead of them, and even those faded as the wind whipped past her face. Link began to climb a long, sweeping wasteland that was dotted with violet and heliotrope dunes. They followed a wagon road that had recently been used by cattle, and the car steadily made its way up the incline. The sky was an intense light blue that was almost painful to look at, so Vienna shielded her face until Link slowed down. From the top of the next ridge they could see more of the red desert ruin. They came across a deep wash that forced Link to turn south. The space was barely wide enough for the car, and Vienna could hear the sound of gravel and earth sliding into the gully. As they crossed the sandy flat on the other side, rocks impeded their progress and had to be moved out of the way. The shelves of silt looked like they might collapse with even the slightest weight, and narrow spaces only allowed for a foot of clearance for the car's outside wheels. But none of these obstacles seemed to faze the cowboy driver, who kept going until they reached the road again. Once there, Link made up for lost time by speeding up. As they ascended another peak, Vienna thought they had reached the top of a high pass nestled between two mountain ranges. The slope on the west side of the pass appeared to be rugged and uneven. Down below, a gray valley stretched out before them, and in the distance a white speck twinkled in the sunlight. Link called it Adam, but Vienna knew that it was Agua Prieta, the neighboring town across the border. She peered out, wishing she could see it closer. The descent from the peak was arduous. The front tires were punctured by sharp stones and cactus thorns, forcing them to stop and replace them. They laid planks across soft spots and even had to break a protruding rock with a sledge to continue. Eventually, a massive boulder blocked the road and Vienna panicked. They had no room to turn the car around, but Link had a different idea. He reversed the car a fair distance and proceeded to the boulder on foot. After a brief moment of tinkering, he ran back down the road. Suddenly, a loud explosion rocked the air, and Vienna saw dust and debris fly everywhere. Link had used dynamite to clear the path. Vienna marveled at Link's resourcefulness. She wondered how Nels, the silent cowboy, felt about the discovery of Link carrying explosives. But Nels reassured her, saying that nothing would stop Link. Vienna began to see Link in a different light. His fearless spirit and quick thinking were admirable, and she found herself drawn to him despite the danger they faced. Nels responded in his own way, his face a shade of gray and his lips tightly pressed together. His eyes, however, mirrored the same cool, bright gleam as Link's. The road ahead was blocked by cacti, rocks, and gullies, but Nels approached each obstacle with a grim sense of humor. He knew that a small mistake on Link's part could spell disaster for the car and its occupants. Link had to use wooden planks to cross sandy washes, and sometimes the wheels slipped off. But he managed to make it across a deep ditch without incident, despite one of the planks sagging and splitting. The road then led them around a narrow, rocky, and slightly downhill corner that was particularly hazardous. Link asked Vienna and Nels to walk around it while he drove the car. Vienna braced herself for the sound of the car crashing down into the canyon, but to her surprise, Link was waiting for them on the other side. As they continued on, the road became steeper and more treacherous. Link had to use ropes on the wheels and half-hitches on the spurs of rock to let the car slide down the inclines. At one particularly bad spot, Vienna exclaimed, "Oh, time is flying!" Link looked up at her as if he had been scolded for being too careful. His eyes shone like steel on ice. Vienna's words seemed to ignite something within him, unleashing his recklessness to its fullest extent. He pushed his car to perform seemingly impossible feats, navigating through gullies, hurdling over rising grounds, and leaping over breaks in the road. He made his vehicle cling to steep inclines like a mountain goat and rounded corners with the inside wheels higher than the outside. He even passed over soft banks of earth that crumbled beneath him as he crossed weak spots. Link continued on, weaving through tortuous passages strewn with rocks, sticking to the old road where possible, but abandoning it for open spaces when necessary. He always went down, descending further and further until he reached a mile-long slope, brown and ridged like a washboard, leading gently down to the valley floor where the sparse grama grass struggled to grow. As the road became clearer, Vienna's heart sank. It led straight across the valley, down to a deep, narrow wash that plunged on one side and descended on the other at an even steeper angle. The crossing would have been difficult for a horse, let alone an automobile. Link turned the car to the right and drove as far along the rim of the wash as the ground would allow. However, the gully only widened and deepened, making it impossible to cross. He tried the other direction, but Vienna noticed the sun had already started its descent into the west. It shone in her face, glaring and angry. Link drove back to the road, crossed it, and continued down the line of the wash. It was a deep cut in the red earth, worn straight down by swift water during rainy seasons. It narrowed, becoming only 5 feet wide in some places. Link studied these points carefully, looking up the slope and making deductions. The valley was now level, with only small breaks in the rim of the wash. As Link drove on, he scoured the land for a place to cross, but to no avail. The southern path was blocked by deep gullies where the water flowed into a canyon, making it impossible to proceed. He had to reverse the car before he could turn it around. Vienna glanced at the stoic driver, but his face betrayed no emotion. When they arrived at the narrowest points, Link stepped out of the vehicle and scouted the area. After a small jump over the wash, Vienna noticed that the other side was slightly lower. She quickly realized Link's plan. He was searching for a spot to jump the car over the gap in the ground. He eventually found a suitable location and tied his red scarf to a nearby bush. Returning to the car, he muttered, "This ain't no airplane, but I've outsmarted that damn wash." He reversed up a gentle slope and stopped just before the steeper incline. His red scarf fluttered in the wind as he hunched over the wheel and gradually accelerated. The car leaped forward like a ferocious tiger, and the sudden gust of wind almost knocked Vienna out of her seat. Nels's strong hands gripped her shoulders as she closed her eyes. The bumpy ride gradually turned into a smooth glide. Suddenly there was a slight bump, followed by a cowboy yell above the hum of the engine. Vienna braced herself for the inevitable crash, but it never came. When she opened her eyes, she saw the flat valley floor unbroken. She hadn't even realized when the car had flown over the wash. She felt a strange sensation of breathlessness, which she attributed to the car's speed. She pulled the hood over her head and leaned back in the seat, the sound of the car filling her world. The excitement and emotional highs were put on hold by the physical sensations. She struggled to breathe as the wind pressed against her chest, making her feel like she was floating and reeling at the same time. Her arms and hands felt heavy, like they were carrying mountains. Eventually she lost consciousness, but when she came to, she felt an arm supporting her. The car was going slower now, and she could breathe again. They were on the outskirts of a city called Adam, near Agua Prieta. The sight of khaki-clad soldiers snapped her back to reality. They were at the boundary between the United States and Mexico, and Agua Prieta lay before her. A soldier came and said an officer would arrive soon. Vienna's attention was on the guard over the road and the dusty town beyond, but she could hear noise and people in the back. A cavalry officer approached the car and removed his hat. "Do you have any information on Norris, the American cowboy who was captured by rebels a few days ago?" Vienna asked the officer. "Yeah," he replied. "There was a fight between a group of Federals and a large force of guerrillas and rebels over the border. The Federals were pushed west, and Norris was reported to have fought recklessly and was captured. He was given a Mexican sentence. Norris is known around here, and his capture caused quite a stir. We tried to get him released, but the guerrillas were afraid to execute him here and thought he might escape, so they took him to San Rafa with a detachment." "He's supposed to be shot tonight at sunset?" Vienna asked. "Yes, and there are rumors that there is a personal grudge against him. I'm sorry I don't have more information. If you're a friend or relative of Norris, I might be able to help you, the officer said. I'm his wife, Vienna interrupted, handing him the telegrams. Please read these and help me if you can. The officer took the telegrams and read them with amazement. I can't read these in Spanish, but I recognize the names signed, he said. He quickly went through the others. These mean that Norris's release has been authorized. They explain the strange rumors we've heard here. The rebel junta's messages failed to reach their destination for some reason. We heard reports of an exchange for Norris, but nothing came of it. No one had the authority to take him to San Rafa. This is an outrage. Come with me to General Salazar, the rebel chief in command. I know him, and maybe we can find out something. Nels made room for the officer, and Link drove the car across the border into Mexican territory. Vienna's nerves were on edge. The asphalt road stretched out before them, leading them straight into Agua Prieta. The town was a colorful sight with its walls and roofs painted in vibrant hues. As their car approached, goats, pigs, and buzzards scurried away from the commotion. Native women dressed in black mantles peeked through iron-barred windows, while men in oversized sombreros, cotton shirts and trousers, bright sashes around their waists and sandals stood still, observing the passing vehicle. Once they reached the end of the road, they found themselves in an enormous plaza, dominated by a circular structure that resembled a corral. It was the bull ring where bullfighting, the national sport, took place. However, at the moment it seemed to be housing a considerable army of ragged, unkempt rebels. The square was littered with tents, packs, wagons, and weapons, with horses, mules, burros, and oxen wandering about. Link had to drive slowly to navigate through the crowded plaza until they reached the entrance of the bull ring. Vienna caught a glimpse of the tents inside before her view was obstructed by the pressing throng. The cavalry officer jumped out of the car and pushed his way into the entrance. "Link, do you know the way to San Rafa?" Vienna asked. "Yes, I've been there," he replied. "How far is it?" she pressed. "Not too far," he muttered. Vienna knew he was lying, but she didn't question him further. The plaza was stifling and malodorous, with the red sun sinking low in the west, but still scorching everything in its path. A swarm of flies buzzed around the car, and low-flying buzzards cast their shadows across Vienna's vision. Then she noticed a row of black birds perched on a tiled roof, looking neither asleep nor resting, but waiting. She fought off a gruesome thought before it could take hold. These rebels and guerrillas were a sorry sight, with their lean, yellow, bearded faces, watching Link as he worked on the car. Every man in the group was different, and none of them looked put together. Their eyes were bright and shiny, but sunk deep into their faces. They all wore big hats made of brown or black felt, straw, or cloth. Every guy had some kind of weapon in a belt or sash. Some had boots, some had shoes, some had moccasins, some had sandals, and some were even barefoot. They were all talking loudly and making wild hand gestures. Vienna couldn't help but think about how easily these poor revolutionaries could get caught up in a frenzy and start killing people. If they were fighting for freedom, it sure wasn't written on their faces. They looked like a pack of wolves on the hunt. Vienna was disgusted and even wondered if their leaders were of the same ilk. But then something caught her eye. Every single man in the crowd, no matter how dirty or torn his clothing was, had some sort of ornament or decoration on him. It could be a tassel, a fringe, a lace, a band, a bracelet, a badge, a belt, a scarf, or something else entirely. It was a sign of their vanity, their one poor possession that they treasured. It was a defining characteristic of their race. Suddenly, the group split apart to let a cavalry officer and a rebel with a commanding presence through. "Ma'am, I had a feeling," the officer said quickly. "The orders to release Norris never made it to Salazar. They were intercepted. Even without them, we could have exchanged Norris if one of his captors hadn't wanted him dead. This guerrilla intercepted the orders and took Norris to San Rafa. It's a tragedy. He should be free right now. I'm sorry." "Who did this?" Vienna interrupted, feeling cold and ill. "Who is the guerrilla?" "Senor Don Carlos Martinez. He's been a bandit, a man of influence in Sonora. He's more of a secret agent in the revolution than an active participant." Vienna's heart raced as she heard the news of Norris being held captive by Don Carlos. She felt her strength falter until Nels, one of her trusted cowboys, placed his hands on her shoulders and spoke with a reassuring tone. Vienna knew she couldn't waste any time, and Nels promised to help her in any way he could. Link Stevens, another cowboy, agreed to join them on their mission despite the odds being against them. Vienna asked an officer if she could get a permit to go to San Rafa, but he warned her that it was a long shot. However, he suggested that she take Senor Fernandez, a Mexican who outranked Don Carlos and knew the captain of the San Rafa detachment. Vienna agreed and thanked the officer for his kindness. Nels and Link quickly prepared the car, and they took off with a loud roar, causing the crowd to scatter. Vienna knew that time was of the essence, and she couldn't afford to waste any more of it. She had to save Norris, no matter the cost. The car zoomed out of the plaza, gaining speed as it raced down a street flanked by walls of white and blue. The rebels were busy constructing barricades in a square as the vehicle whizzed past. The railroad track was teeming with iron flat cars that carried mounted artillery pieces. Officer Fernandez was acknowledged by the guards at the outskirts as the car sped by. Vienna secured her glasses tightly over her eyes and wrapped veils around her face. She was in a strange state of excitement, feeling a burning sensation that made her pulse race, and she was determined to witness everything that was feasible. The sun, which was sullen and red as fire, hung low over the mountain range in the west. How far it had fallen. A narrow white road, dusty and hard as stone, stretched out before her, a highway that had been in use for centuries. If it were broad enough to allow vehicles to pass, it would have been a fantastic course for automobiles. However, the car was brushing past weeds, dusty flowers, mesquite boughs, and cactus arms as it accelerated. The old relentless force that pushed Vienna back and the constant howl of the wind filled her ears. Link Stevens crouched low over the wheel. His eyes were hidden beneath a leather helmet and goggles, but his face was uncovered. He looked like a demon with his dark, stone-hard features that were strangely grinning. Vienna suddenly realized how exceptional and remarkable a driver Link Stevens was. She sensed that Link Stevens could not have been weak. He was a cowboy, and he was genuinely driving the car, making it obey his commands, just as he was born to master a horse. He had never driven at a speed that satisfied him until now. His objective was to save Norris and make Vienna happy. Life meant nothing to him. This reality gave him the courage to face the danger of this ride. With complete disregard for his own safety, Link expertly operated the machine, choosing the perfect power, speed, and guidance to get Vienna to San Rafa in time to save Norris. The white, narrow road flew by in a blur as they sped towards their destination. Even when Vienna noticed a clump of cactus in the distance, it seemed to shoot towards them and disappear in an instant. Despite the breakneck speed, Vienna knew that Link was holding something in reserve, taking the turns of the road as if he knew exactly what was ahead. He trusted in his cowboy's luck, even though a single wagon or a herd of cattle could mean a fatal crash. Vienna never closed her eyes during those moments of danger. If Link was willing to stake everyone's lives on chance, she was willing to stake her own to save Norris. The car hummed and thrummed, darting around curves on two wheels like a bullet. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Soft ground and cactus plants impeded their progress, causing the car to labor and pant and grind through gravel. Every leaf, blade, and branch of cactus bore wicked thorns that could easily puncture a tire. Finally, it happened. The bursting report rang out, signaling a tire blowout. The car jerked and stumbled like a wounded animal before finally coming to a stop under the control of the skilled driver. Link quickly replaced the tire, but even his speed couldn't make up for lost time. The red sun, darkening as it approached the horizon, seemed to mock Vienna, making her feel small and insignificant. With a burst of energy, Link hopped back in the driver's seat and the car surged forward. The landscape around them changed constantly, from rolling hills to rocky terrain, with mesquite trees and other greenery providing a brief respite from the harsh desert. Vienna took in all the sights with a keen eye, but her focus was on one thing only, a straight, uninterrupted road. However, the road had other plans, winding lazily up a hill that grew taller and taller until it seemed like a mountain. The descent was treacherous, but Link kept up his speed despite the danger. Just when Vienna thought they might make it, disaster struck again. A sharp spear pierced the tire, sending the car careening off the road and into a cactus. Link and Nels worked like mad to replace the tire, but the setting sun made Vienna feel like time was running out. Strangely, no one spoke during the entire ordeal, adding to the tension and fear. Vienna was practically bursting with impatience, but she knew better than to try and rush Link. He was always lightning fast in everything he did. So she stood there in silence, feeling the heat inside her slowly dissipating, and watched with a growing sense of despair. She hoped and prayed that the road ahead would be long, straight and smooth. And then suddenly there it was, a clear, narrow lane that seemed to stretch on for miles, disappearing into the distance like a thin white line against the greenery. Vienna's heart leaped with hope, and she could only imagine that Link felt the same. The car roared to life with a jerk, answering Vienna's silent call for speed. Faster and faster it went until the roar turned into a whining hum that drowned out all other sounds. The wind rushed past them with such force that Vienna felt like she was being pushed down by a solid wall. She couldn't move, couldn't even hear anything over the sound of the wind. The desert plants along the road blurred together, becoming two shapeless fences that seemed to slide towards them from a distance. Objects ahead became streaky and blurry, and the sky took on a reddish hue. Vienna turned to look at Link one more time, realizing that this ride was just as much his as it was hers. Link was hunched over the wheel, his face strained and rigid with concentration. He was a great driver, but the stakes were high. One wrong move and they would be done for. Vienna could see the millions of spikes on the cactus plants that lined the road, and she knew that if they so much as brushed against one of them, it would be the end. Link's cheek and jaw were bulging with the effort, and his lips were tightly shut. The smile was gone from his face, and Vienna could see that he was just as human as she was. She felt a strange sense of camaraderie with him, realizing that he understood her soul just as Monty Price had understood it. Link was the unstoppable machine, forged by lightning and driven by a woman's will. He was a man whose strength was fueled by a woman's passion. He stood as tall as she did, felt her love, and understood her pain. These qualities made him a hero. However, it was the hard life, the dangerous years spent in the wild desert, the companionship of ruthless men, and the raw elements that made his physical accomplishments possible. Vienna adored Link's spirit and gloried in the man he was. She had imprinted on her heart a memory of the little hunched, deformed figure of Link's, hanging onto the wheel with a fearless grip, his gray face like a stone mask. That was the last clear image in Vienna's mind during the ride. She was blinded, dazed, and succumbed to the demands on her strength. She fell back, only vaguely aware of a helping hand. Confusion overwhelmed her senses. She rushed through a dark chaos under the wrathful red eye of the setting sun. She felt like she was being propelled through a limitless space, rushing like a shooting star. For moments, hours, or ages, she was pushed with the velocity of an automobile, hurtling down an endless white track through the universe. Giant cacti plants as large as pine trees loomed over her, piercing her with giant spikes. She became an unstable being in a shapeless, colorless, soundless cosmos of unrelated things, but always rushing, even to meet the darkness that haunted her and never reached her. But at the end of infinite time, the rush ceased. Vienna lost the strange feeling of being disembodied by a frightfully swift careening through boundless distance. She distinguished low voices apparently far away. Then she opened her eyes to blurred but conscious sight. The car had come to a stop. Link was lying face down over the wheel. Nels hollered for her, and she rubbed her hands together, eager to see what he had found. As they traveled, a pristine house with whitewashed walls and a brown-tiled roof caught her eye. Beyond the house, she could see the silhouette of a mountain range and the final red glow of the setting sun. Chapter 26. Vienna noticed that the car was surrounded by armed Mexicans. They were different from the others she had seen that day, and she wondered why they were so silent and respectful. Suddenly a sharp order was given, and Señor Fernandez appeared, walking swiftly towards them. Despite his dark face and strange accent, he spoke her language politely and authoritatively. "Señora, it is not too late," he said. "You got here just in time. El Capitan Norris will be free." Vienna was shocked to hear that Norris would be free. She rose from the car, but would have fallen if Fernandez had not taken her arm. Nels supported her on the other side. Together they helped her out of the car. For a moment Vienna's mind was spinning, but soon she regained her composure. As they walked through the hall and into the small room full of armed rebels, Vienna scanned their faces, hoping to see Don Carlos. However, he was nowhere to be found. A soldier spoke to her in Spanish, but spoke too quickly for her to understand. Despite his shabby appearance, he exuded an air of authority and was as gracious as Señor Fernandez. Vienna's attention was directed towards a man holding a bright red scarf near the window. "Señora, they were waiting for the sun to set when we arrived," Fernandez explained. The signal was about to be given for Señor Norris's walk to death. "Norris's walk?" Vienna repeated in shock. Fernandez then went on to explain that Norris had been court-martialed and sentenced according to a Mexican custom reserved for brave soldiers deserving of honorable executions. On Thursday at sunset, Norris was to be set free and was allowed to walk in any direction he pleased. However, he knew that death was inevitable and that there was no escape from the men armed with rifles. "Señora, we have sent messengers to every squad of waiting soldiers with an order that El Capitan is not to be shot. He is unaware of his release. I shall give the signal for his freedom," Fernandez declared ceremoniously. Vienna noticed his pride and realized that the situation brought out the vanity, ostentation, and cruelty of his race. She feared that Fernandez would keep her in suspense and let Norris walk in ignorance of his freedom, but she soon realized that he was simply barbarous. Vienna couldn't help but feel a horrible fear that Fernandez was lying and that she would witness Norris's execution. But she knew that the man was honest, even if he lacked compassion. In order to satisfy his primal instincts of sentiment, romance, and cruelty, Fernandez devised a plan to start Norris on a deadly walk. He reveled in the thought of watching Norris face death and seeing Vienna's agony of doubt, fear, pity, and love. Vienna was on the brink of collapse, feeling weak and unsteady. "Señora, it will be one beautiful thing," exclaimed Fernandez as he took the scarf from the rebel's hand. He was passionate and glowing, and his eyes had a strange, soft, cold flash. "I'll wave the scarf, Señora. That will be the signal. It will be seen down at the other end of the road. Señor Norris's jailer will see the signal, take off Norris's irons, release him, open the door for his walk. Norris will be free, but he will not know. He will expect death. As he is a brave man, he will face it. He will walk this way. Every step of that walk he will expect to be shot from some unknown quarter, but he will not be afraid. Señora, I have seen El Captain fighting in the field. What is death to him? Will it not be magnificent to see him come forth to walk down? Señora, you will see what a man he is. All the way he will expect cold, swift death. Here at this end of the road he will meet his beautiful lady." Vienna faltered. "Is there no possibility of a mistake?" Fernandez replied firmly, "None. My order included unloading of rifles." She then asked about Don Carlos, and Fernandez informed her that he was in irons and must answer to General Salazar. Vienna looked down the deserted road, feeling the last ruddy glow of the sun over the mountain range. It had been torture for her to think of that sunset, but now the afterlights were luminous, beautiful, and prophetic. With a heart stricken by both joy and agony, she saw Fernandez wave the scarf. Then she waited. The road ahead was desolate. Not a single sign of life could be seen. The room behind her was silent. The wait felt like an eternity. The pink, blue, and white houses with their colorful roofs were etched in her memory forever. The dusty road resembled a street from Pompeii, abandoned and forgotten for centuries. Suddenly the door creaked open and a tall man emerged. It was Norris. Vienna's emotions overwhelmed her, and she had to steady herself against the windowsill. She had saved him, and he was free. Life transformed in that moment, becoming sweet, full, and strange. Norris greeted someone at the door before scanning the road. He rolled a cigarette, lit it, and leisurely began his walk down the middle of the road. Although he appeared nonchalant, the eerie silence, the red haze, and the charged atmosphere made everything feel unnatural. Norris occasionally stopped to survey his surroundings, but only silence answered his calls. He lit another cigarette, and then his pace quickened. Vienna watched with a mixture of pride, love, pain, and glory as he made his way down the road. It felt like an eternity, longer than her awakening, her struggle, and her remorse. She couldn't wait until he reached the end of the road. Amidst the chaos of her emotions, Vienna experienced fleeting moments of panic. She wondered what she could possibly say to him and how she could face him. As she waited behind the window, she could see the tall and powerful figure of Norris approaching. His face was still a dark gleam, but she knew it wouldn't be long before she could distinguish his features. She longed to run and meet him, but fear kept her rooted to her hiding place. She imagined the terrible walk he must have taken, thinking of home, family, and life itself, knowing he was walking towards his executioners. Despite the turmoil in her heart and mind, Vienna still felt the incomprehensible variations of emotion that are unique to a woman. Every step Norris took sent shivers down her spine. She had a strange, subtle intuition that he was not unhappy, and that he believed without a doubt that he was walking to his death. His steps began to drag, even though he had started off swiftly. The old, hard, physical, wild nerve of the cowboy was perhaps in conflict with the spiritual growth of the finer man, realizing too late that life should not be sacrificed. As Norris approached, his face grew sharper and clearer. He was stalking now, and there was a hint of impatience in his stride. He couldn't believe how long it was taking these hidden Mexicans to kill him. Halfway down the road, in front of a house and directly opposite Vienna, Norris halted abruptly. He presented himself as a fair, bold target to his executioners, standing motionless for a full minute. But only silence greeted him. It was plain to Vienna, and she thought to anyone with eyes to see, that this was the moment when Norris should have been mercifully shot, since he had been spared for so long on his walk. With no shots fired, Norris's demeanor shifted from rugged dignity to reckless scorn. He strolled over to the corner of the house, rolled another cigarette, and presented his broad chest to the window as he smoked and waited. Vienna found the wait unbearable. Though it was only a moment, it felt like an eternity. Norris's face was hard and scornful. Did he suspect treachery from his captors? Did they plan to toy with him before murdering him? Vienna thought she saw an inscrutable, mocking smile pass over Norris's lips. He held his position for what seemed like a reasonable amount of time to him. Then, with a laugh and a shrug, he threw his cigarette into the road. He shook his head in disbelief at the incomprehensible motives of the men who had no fair reason for delay. He made a sudden, violent action, more than just straightening his powerful frame. It was an instinctive display of violence. Then he turned to face north. Vienna knew he was thinking of her and calling her a silent farewell. He would serve her to his last breath, leave her free, and keep his secret. The image of him, dark-browed, fire-eyed, strangely sad yet strong, was etched into Vienna's heart. The next moment Norris strode forward, boldly and scornfully, to force a speedy fulfillment of his sentence. Vienna stepped into the doorway, and Norris staggered as if he had been mortally wounded. His dark face turned white, and he stared at Vienna with a wild fear, as if he had seen an apparition and doubted his own sight. Perhaps he had called out to her like the Mexicans called out to their virgin, or perhaps he imagined sudden death had come unawares, and she was his vision in the afterlife. "Who you be?" he rasped. She made an effort to raise her hands, but they shook uncontrollably. On her second attempt, she managed to extend them towards him. "It's me, Your Highness, your lady." The end. This concludes Frontier by Starlight, a Western novel. Written by Ken Cannon. Visit brooksaudiobooks.com for updates on the availability of new books and a special free offer.